Hello, you're watching Transbrations. I'm your host, nahshondion. Thanks for joining us. Today's special guest is Elmaz Abinader, an author and performer. She found her family on the bookshelves in the library where Langston Hughes led her. As a poet, she unmasked language to show truth. Her most recent poetry collection, This House, My Bones, was the editor's selection for 2014 from Willow Books Aquarius. Her books include a memoir, Children of the Roojme, A Family's Journey from Lebanon, and a book of poetry, In the Country of My Dreams, which won the Oakland PEN Josephine Miles Award. Her plays include Ramadan Moon, 32 Mohammeds, and Country of Origin. Elmaz is one of the co-founders of the Voices of Our Nation Arts Foundation, VONA Voices, a writing workshop for writers of color. She teaches at Mills College and is a fitness instructor at the Oakland Y. Elmaz and her family have also been an ally to the African American community for over 60 years. Hello, Elmaz, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, nahshon. It's very exciting to be here and to talk to you.
It is exciting to talk to you too. How are you doing today?
I'm in France and I'm at a writing residency, so I'm doing really, really well.
As part of the new immigrant community trying to assimilate in Masontown, Pennsylvania, how did you and your family adjust?
I'd like to say that Masontown was part of my childhood, and another town, Carmichael's, was the second part of my childhood, and those were two distinctly different places. My father, who's from Lebanon, both my father and mother from Lebanon, had a store, and a store is a very high profile situation, I think, for an immigrant. So people see you and they see your family. And so they feel like they have the freedom to express how they feel about your presence in their community. In Masontown, since we had relatives, we had one kind of presence. There were also African Americans in that community. We moved across the bridge to Carmichael's. We were closer to West Virginia, and we were more, I think, more unusual for that town. And in that town, we experienced a lot of racial hostility toward our family. We're the only brown people in town. My father had a very beautiful business, but it failed because people did not want to purchase anything from a terrorist or whatever number of names they came up to talk about us. So adjusting for us was splitting our life in two. We had one face to the public, you know, the double consciousness thing, right? One face to the public, and then in the home, we were who we were. We were Arab, we were Lebanese, we were a big Catholic family with a lot of passion, and that part had to be kept to ourselves.
And what type of business did your father have?
Clothes and shoes.
Clothes and shoes.
Yeah. All the kids worked there.
For all of the efforts, the nice clothes and good manners, the perfect English and exemplary grades, we did not escape being called sand nigger or camel jockeys. Later, when we moved to an all-white community, as my father was trying to grow his business, the prejudice was aggressive and tiresome. Do you remember any of the conversations that your parents discussed with you regarding prejudice and being called ethnic slurs, how to deal with that type of behavior?
There were two kinds of thought streams on that. One was, as immigrants, authority and other people were always right. We always had to prove to other people that we were as good as we were. We had to be better. We had to be better dressed. We had to be more well-behaved. We had to be perfect. That perfection is something that's very, very hard on a child. But then there was this second stream about being proud of who we were, to being proud of being Arab, and show ourselves as being more dignified and classier than the people who were running us into the ground. And so it was kind of a double message, and sometimes it contradicted, because authority sometimes would tell us we were ugly while we were trying to tell ourselves that we weren't. And it became very confusing. And for many of us in the family, it changed our personalities because we were responding to the outside gaze and trying to feel good about ourselves while feeling that gaze upon us. So it was very uncomfortable, and I think it contributed to my being a writer.
So you answered the question much earlier. And how long did your father's business, how long was he in business for?
I think it closed in '79. So he started as a peddler, you know, going from place to place where coal miners were getting paid, and he had like a table of stuff that he sold to them. And then he rented a table. So this is in the '40s. He rented a table in somebody else's store, and he had a display of shoes. And then he had his own little store that was about as big as a closet. And then he got a bigger store. So I would say from the time he got here in 1938 till 1979 in different locations and in different kind of constructions of the business. He wasn't a natural salesman. It wasn't really his calling, but as an immigrant, he couldn't follow his dream. He didn't have the money or the means or the language to become a lawyer, which was really what he was interested in.
Oh. And what type of law was he interested in?
I really think he wanted to do advocacy. It wasn't called immigrant law when we were young, but I think he wanted to advocate for other people. And my mother wanted to be a doctor. And both those dreams were just not even within their range. They had so many children and so many responsibilities, and
what did they end up becoming?
Just owning these stores.
Did any of your siblings did they end up becoming doctors or lawyers?
No, but among us we have 7 master's degrees and a PhD and other signifiers of success. So we did fulfill what the next generation is supposed to fulfill, which was, we got accomplished in our ways. We are all socially or politically and socially active. So while we're not doctors or lawyers, we have been, I'm a literary activist. My sister works in public health. I have another sister who's a filmmaker who did all the films at the Museum of Natural History in New York, most of them. I have a brother who works for the American Task Force on Lebanon. He's a politician. So we all work in these fields that serve and help communities and create change.
So your family is obviously very popular in this country.
Well, I don't know if we're popular, but we definitely have positioned ourselves to help with the seismic shifts, to make things happen. From the beginning of when my brothers were in college, they campaigned to have ROTC taken off their campus so that there wouldn't be a presence of the military. There was always some kind of activism from very early in our lives.
As the Cold War was ending, you started to witness another struggle, the fight for civil rights. Your parents often shielded you from traumatic images, but not issues regarding the fight for civil rights. As new Americans, what impact did Martin Luther King's ideals have on your family?
It's really an interesting thing because we're very, very Catholic, which puts you in a very conservative and kind of sometimes limiting world. But my father was a believer in nonviolence, much like Gandhi. He had this belief that everyone is equal and that we need this world to look at each other for our substance. And so when he heard King for the first time, and I think it helped that King was also a man of God, that he was highly influenced by the issues of nonviolence or the methodology of nonviolence that he purported. And my father loves good speeches. He loves when people can do moving and beautiful speeches. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have a television for a long time. And by the time we got one, King became mandatory watching for us. Whenever he was on, it was a family affair. We would sit and we would listen and we would digest him in the same way we were digesting the doctrine from our Catholic school. Mm. What was interesting at the time is my brothers, who I was telling you became activists early on, were involved with Malcolm X's side of things. And so there was a healthy debate in our family about Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X, the one being by any means necessary and King being, of course, only by nonviolent means. So we had that going on in our family as a way of talking about these times.
What did he say regarding if any acts of violence were committed towards you or your siblings? Did that ever come up, how to prepare you for anything?
No, we didn't have talks in those days. As a matter of fact, when things did happen, say at school, they just made them kind of move to the side until people became more aggressive. And then my mother went down to the PTA meeting. She went down to the school board, grabbed her purse and went down to the school board. And then it was in the newspaper. When you're in a town of 700 people, it's hard to hide what's going on. Yeah, it was small.
That's like what? In New York, that's probably
an apartment building, a small apartment building.
a few blocks, no, you can't hide much, no.
Yeah.
No. You received your BA in writing and communication from the University of Pittsburgh in 1974. you embraced your heritage and wrote about your family's history during that time. What was the turning point for you to embrace your heritage?
We always had beautiful storytelling sessions in our house where my dad and mother would sit and give us stories of the old country. So we lived this mythology as a really beautiful and big thing. And when I left home to go to college, suddenly I started to see that we were part of a bigger world, and that the prejudice that we were feeling, of course, was unnecessary, but there were also people from all over the world at this giant university. I was at University of Pittsburgh. It gave me kind of an opening to say, well, here's who we are. Here's the story we have to tell. So I was inspired by my own parents' storytelling to talk about our lives, but I was also starting to investigate who they were as people. So I did a series of poems early on about where my parents were when they were my age. Like, at this age, where were they? And at this age, where were they? And, because their life was so different. They were on a boat, or they were leaving their home, or they were immigrating. That's one thing that fueled that. And then the other thing was my father started corresponding with his children by writing us letters about his life. And so that was also very inspiring.
And this is while you're still young and in the home?
No, this is when we all are off to place. I think that's one of the ways he dealt with the empty nest syndrome, was by reaching out and telling us stories, because we weren't home.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
In 1985, you completed your PhD program at the University of Nebraska, English fiction and nonfiction writing, and you taught English and creative writing. Earlier, you mentioned what influenced you to become a writer. How did poetry start flowing out of you?
Poetry is a natural language for me. Whenever I feel the need to interpret the world around me in ways that reframe it so that I can both find the soul and the beauty of it, even if the soul of what's going on around me is dark, poetry seems to be the most accessible form for me. And so writing poetry, most teenagers do it, right? To talk about how bad their lives are and how love broke them. But I use it as a lens to look at the world and make sense out of it. Like, why was there a civil war in Lebanon, and how did that affect my family's country? Why was my mother subjected to this moment where she had to show her bloody sheets on her wedding night? Why was my dad running from his country in the 30s after the nationalist movement? I wanted a lens, right? I wanted a lens to understand these things. And while I didn't have all the research and all the time in the world, I wanted to look at those events with my heart, and that was the way I could do it, through poetry.
Do you remember what age you actually started writing, whether it was poetry or just writing your thoughts or feelings? Do you remember what age or when?
I believe I started when I was very young. I was probably in 5th or 6th grade. And for a period of time, I had a childhood illness that put me in a wheelchair, and I was stuck at home. And I wrote a lot during that time, because that was a great release, because I couldn't be out in the world. Mm-hmm. And also during that time, I read a lot of books that were above my age grade, let's say my brother's college books. I read a lot of philosophy, and I read a lot of classical work that they had stored from their college classes. And so I was becoming interior while I was ill. I was becoming in myself. And so writing journals and writing essays and writing, I even wrote some funny things. Poetry, of course, that was a natural way for me to speak, to be heard.
Besides the filmmaker, are there any other artists or creatives?
Well, everybody's an artist, not full-time. Like my sister, who is a facilitator for public health and community organizations, is a dancer, and she's taught salsa and is also a tango dancer. My brother, who is a diplomat, is also a poet. I have a brother who is in the field of business, and he loves to write about music and religion. So everybody, it seems like it's a second language that we were taught. People are taught to speak, but we were also taught to write. My father, who never went to school, spoke 7 languages, and he loved to write on napkins, on envelopes, on anything he could find. And there were poems scattered around our house all the time. So it was just.
What languages did he speak?
He spoke Portuguese, Spanish, French, Arabic, Aramaic, English, and I said Portuguese, I probably left something out. Yeah. And that's because he traveled and he's really good with languages.
Wow.
And I wish I had inherited that.
That is amazing. Wow.
Oh, I left out Arabic.
What languages do you speak?
Only Spanish. And I understand Arabic, but I can't really speak back in Arabic. So I'm a one-way Arabic speaker.
One-way Arabic speaker. How did you feel seeing Anglo-centric literature overrepresented while seeing a shortage of Arab literature?
You feel alienated, don't you? You feel like you're invisible, that your story doesn't count, that there's nobody who's living the life you live. That's one level. The other level is an anxiety to find it, to look for it, and to see who could speak to you. So I was always looking for stories or poems that were written by people who are going through the immigrant experience or the experience of invisibility or persecution. And sometimes that led me to people who were in the concentration camps. Sometimes that led me to African American literature or literature from the continent or translated literature, but it was very alienated, which is why I went from the English department to writing, because I really felt like sitting and interpreting poems by all these white guys, no matter how good they were, had very little to say to me. And so I had to get my own language about poetry before I could go back to theirs and understand how we connected. So,
besides Gibran Khalil Gibran, what other Arab writers were you familiar with or were published?
When I was young, not very many. There was a poet named Samuel Hazo, and until I think my graduate program, I hadn't really become very familiar with any others. And so it was a real dearth. I really had to find other people to read.
When and how were you first introduced to Langston Hughes?
I was introduced to Langston Hughes through a little poster that my father bought me to hang up in the room while I was sick. And it was a drawing of barren snowfields with sticks of trees poking out, and it had the poem Hold Fast to Dreams on it, and I would look at it every day. And so that became a little bit of my mantra while I was ill, and has been in my head ever since. So
I was trying to figure out if I've seen that poster or that image before.
So classic.
Is it? Then I probably have seen it.
I'm sure you have. I mean, among the millions of other things you've seen in your life.
Right, exactly. What did his poem Hold Fast to Dreams mean for you?
It was hope. I mean, there's not much hope when you're sick, when you're brown, when you're discriminated against. And at that point I was feeling very fat and ugly, and all those things that come when you're going in adolescence, when your body is different from other people's bodies. And so that was my inscription of hope right there on my wall.
Inscription of hope. And how did he become the Dr. Martin Luther King of your literary life?
Because Langston Hughes told people that their language was okay, that they didn't have to use the master's language. He exemplified the idea of using the things that were in your life to be the substance for poems, like using the church songs or using jazz or using the street scenes in New York. He opened up the sources and the resources of where writing comes from. When you have an education that's about limits, it's about iambic pentameter, it's about reading or using very formalized language. It's about being artificial, basically. And a lot of us learn to do that. We learn to pass, literarily pass, become writers of sonnets or writers of, things that sound like they were T.S. Eliot or Carlos Williams. He freed me from that, the way he freed a lot of other people from that. And so when I saw that poetry was song and protest and testament and witnessing and photograph and documentary, I felt like my whole world had opened up in terms of what I can do with poems.
Your first book was a memoir, The Children of the Roojme, a family's journey from Lebanon. What did it tell?
It was 3 generations of the Lebanese family two stories of immigration, one to Brazil and one to the United States. And it tells it from the male perspective for half of the book, and the female perspective for half the book. It's a memoir. Unusual as a memoir because it's in third person and the writer is not in it, like I'm not in that memoir. So it was based on letters, diaries, interviews, medical papers, newspaper articles, boat manifests, all the research I could get about my own family. And it was 7 years of research and several boxes, large boxes of translated diaries that were kept in my family back to 1840. And so I set about translating them, and it was hard because it was in more than one languages I didn't read. And a lot of the translators who helped me couldn't read or couldn't write English well. And so I would have to, my dad, for instance, take it from broken English and make it proper English until I had all my source materials. Ironically, all those diaries did not include stories of the women. So I had to go seek those stories, and I had to do a lot of interviews, and the women were less excited about being interviewed than the men were. Men are like always heroes of their own stories. But my mother, for instance, had her name changed in my book, even though it's obvious she's married to my dad, but she didn't want her name to be her name. And so working with the women was a little bit harder, but I finally got what I needed. And I think it tells a really important immigrant story that is not only ours, but I think crosses a lot of countries and a lot of people's stories, similar stories. So
going all the way back to the 1800s, and what did you discover?
I learned so much. First thing I discovered was the way my family romanticized Lebanon was not true. It isn't a beautiful pearl. It has a lot of problems. And the way they romanticized our family was also not true. The family fought and stole from each other. Whenever there's an occupation or a siege, people grab everything and pull it into themselves, right? So for instance, when my great-grandmother died, my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather died within 18 minutes of each other. They died at the same time. My family members who were alive at that time went in and stole everything out of their houses. So all this kind of romanticizing that they did about the past and about their country was kind of blown apart. Not that it's not a great place and it's not beautiful and my family isn't lovely, but people are complicated. And I think to own up to that complication is something that I needed to do. So that was one thing that I learned. The other thing I learned was Lebanon is an unusual place. It's a place where everybody automatically, pretty much everybody speaks 3 languages. They have an incredible capacity for creating beauty and hospitality. And because of that, they were constantly besieged by people who wanted to take them over. And we're always having that problem. We're having it now. We're in the worst economic position we've been in our history right now.
Why is it that they all speak 3 different languages?
Well, they take their grammar school in Arabic, and many of them take their secondary school in French and their college in English.
Oh,
yeah, and a lot of people are in the hospitality industry, so having many languages is a really important part because it's been a tourist attraction and a service economy. We don't have oil. I mean, we're not an oil country, right? What we are is a beach. We're a giant beach with beautiful mountains, and so people have traditionally wanted to go there to see the beauty, and it's been difficult since the economy's collapsed.
And this is recently?
Yes. I don't know if you remember, there was a big blast that blew up Beirut a couple years ago from a gas explosion, and it destroyed all these downtown businesses and people's homes. And there was what they call the flight of the intellectuals. So a lot of people who could afford to leave left. And then the aid money that came into Lebanon was somehow disappeared. And so there was a lot of corruption in the government. And since then, inflation has gone up like 200%. It's really pretty terrible right now.
I've always, ever since like the 80s, and when I started paying attention to the news or just hearing about world affairs, Lebanon, I always remember hearing Lebanon. I don't remember what I heard, but Lebanon has always been on my radar, that the name, that country, since I was a kid.
Well, in the 80s, we were in the middle of a civil war. So that's probably what you were hearing.
Yeah. What was the process outside of the memoir? What's the process for writing your stories? I know you said it took 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, the research was 7 years. It took more time than that. One of the things I try to do is take the lens in very, very close. I always say to people when I write, it's not important to me what happens in the country. What's important to me is what happens in the kitchen, because in the kitchen, you can tell what's happening in the country. If there's enough food, if all the family members are home, if the water is running, if the electricity is on, if the family is happy and eating together, if the family is apart, if all the men are gone, if the children are wounded. I mean, you can tell everything that's going on in the country by looking at what's going on in the kitchen. And so I'm more interested in looking at, take that lens and going deep into the home and deep into people's lives and taking it away from this big generalized picture of what's going on. So I'm always, even in the poetry, trying to say, let's look at the lives. I have the title poem, This House, My Bones, was written because we were threatening to invade Iraq, which of course we did. But we threatened for a few weeks, saying that Saddam Hussein had to show us his weapons and give them up, even though they weren't there, right? The weapons of mass destruction. Mm-hmm. So this poem is about, hey guys, look at the life before you go destroy it. Go to some kid's bedroom, go into their kitchen, sit in their mosque, sit beside them, look at what the kid draws, taste their tea. These are the people you're going to invade and bomb to death. Mm-hmm. Take a minute and smell it. Look at it, feel it, be in it, listen to the music, listen to the call to prayer. So I'm very invested in the narrative being as personal as possible in ways that no matter where you're from, you can relate to that particular narrative.
And what was the title of that, the literature you just mentioned again?
This House, My Bones, my last poetry book.
And I don't have it in front of me, but you referenced something about generational trauma. I just know, being African-American, I've always heard the term generational trauma. I've never heard it referenced in any other cultures. Not that it's unique to African-American culture, but I've never heard anyone else reference, generational trauma.
Well, for African-Americans, tracing generational trauma can be done in material ways, because you have had 400 years of oppression. It manifests in material ways: poor public health, mortality rates, quality of life, and so on. So that's, for African Americans, it's very material. So it's like, we know that exists for my family. And there are two ways that I want to talk about it. When you are under siege, it becomes part of your DNA. So there's this feeling that you're always under siege, that someone's always going to come, right, and take your stuff. Mm-hmm. That's one level. But the other level that I've been writing about recently is also, there's a generational trauma that's happening to the earth. When you're always bombing or damming up the rivers or destroying something or burning. For instance, when the Israelis go into Palestine and they get their big bulldozer and they knock down all those olive groves to take away their economy, right? And that have been growing for years and years and years, that scars the earth. So I believe that the earth also suffers generational trauma.
That's what it was. That's what it was. And it does. The earth is very scarred.
Yeah, it's very scarred. It's not going to be able to recover. I mean, it's not like the earth can go to therapy. I can go to therapy and kind of work my crap out, right? The earth, it's just going to keep being a victim of our carelessness and our recklessness.
Your hangout, the cafe where the fool simmers fresh parsley and scallions in pots on blue lanes. There's a shadow on the map of blood drawn on the sidewalk where X, he was shot. X, he is hit in the back. X, the ambulance arrives. X, the driver cannot navigate the storm of fire and fear. And X, the street fills with mourners, a matter of course. The words fly rockets and melodies. Each body is its own island. And the waters gather round, splashing against the shores, pushing a million heartbeats against the silence, exhaling 1,000 zagrat, pumping into the lungs everything they have. Children are lost everywhere. In their bodies form land masses, a new diagram that must be inset into our geographies so we know where we stand. Sip tepid water slow now. Wait for the beans to cool. The metal of the spoon stains your mouth, leaves sulfur on your tongue. You cannot be here anymore, and you cannot leave. One of the things that I did in this collection of poems, the inspiration of it, is the way I look at the earth. I travel a lot and I spend a lot of time in natural places. And I see a lot of what history has done to the earth, how wars have made a mark on the earth, but also how nature has made a mark on the earth. And so one of the things I recognize that everything that happens on the earth is a way of reshaping it. At the same time, I look at how our bodies are the same mass, land mass as earth. And so the things that happen in the world to us also recreate our bodies, so that our bodies carry memory and history the same way the earth carries memory and history. So these poems are a way of exchanging positions with the earth, finding ourselves as part of its landmass, and feeling the incursions of history and the bruises of life upon it.
What age did you arrive in America?
I was born here.
Oh, you were born here. Oh, okay. It was
My parents came in 38. So that's a little before my birth.
Where were you and what were you doing on 9/11?
I was in Oakland. I was on the way home from working out or teaching at the Y. And my sister called me. I have a sister in Oakland. I have a sister in New York. My sister in Oakland called me screaming. And I immediately tried to call the sister in New York and couldn't get in touch with her. And it was just like everyone else, a stressful day of trying to get in touch with people. And the first thing that entered my mind, of course, was I hope it wasn't one of us, because we knew what would happen, and it did. That's why we have Homeland Security. That's why we have all the mosques under surveillance. So, yeah. So I was in Oakland.
How did it affect your community, your family, your community? And
well, we immediately went into action as a family ourselves, into trying to educate people and trying to figure out what was going on, because there were these roundups. I don't know if you know that they would say things like all Arab men have to go report to immigration, and then they never came back. And this happened in Los Angeles. The other thing that affected me deeply was Guantanamo Bay, because the prison there was holding people who never were convicted or sentenced, and they still are there. And so it was a point of action for us. We also were afraid of backlash. But one of the ironic parts of it, because there are thinking minds in this country, that instead of backlash, people started, because I'm a writer and I'm high profile, people started wanting to hear from me. So I did a lot of speaking and a lot of writing and educating during that time.
you became much more visible.
It was ironic, because I would say to people, I've been writing for 20 years and now you want me to come on your panel. Now you want me to be on your stage. That's really interesting. And I moved that after a while, because I felt like they could ask me to speak because I'm Lebanese, I'm fair skinned, I'm highly educated, I speak good English, and I'm female and Christian. I was raised Christian. So I would say to them, instead of me, how about an Arab from the Gulf or North Africa? How about somebody who's Muslim? How about a woman who's veiled? Why do you stop coming to the safe Arab and go find yourself somebody whose life day to day is threatened as they're walking down the street? I could pass as so many things, right? But if you're veiled, you can't. If you are Muslim, you can't. And so
They trusted you.
They trusted me. So I kept insisting to pass the mic on. I would try to pass the mic on. And if that didn't happen, I would bring somebody with me who could represent people who are more under threat than I was.
You mentioned Guantanamo,
Guantanamo Bay, yeah.
Guantanamo Bay.
Right.
I've always, you know, heard it and read it. I've never actually pronounced it at Guantanamo Bay. I just saw some images yesterday. They were transporting some of the prisoners.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, just they're handcuffed. Their hands are like all wrapped up, and they've got these things on their head. These like headphones. You know, they're these masks, I guess, for COVID. I mean, just it's just amazing to, I don't know if amazing is the word, but to live in this country and to see, you know, this is a country that professes or, you know, gets involved in other humanitarian issues across the globe and has been for decades. Just to see how, you know, some Americans are treated, but how prisoners are treated, specifically within Guantanamo Bay, those pictures are, you know, what are they not doing to them, you know, that we're not seeing? And I know
your imagination can run wild, because there have been some testimonies, and most of them are in cells they can't stand up in. So they have to sit on the floor or lie down, which is, how do you live like that?
About 20 years ago, I remember there were a lot of photographs of them being tortured and, you know, violated, and I think some had leashes on their necks, and that people are allowed to treat other people like that, you know, and it is for some cause for celebration. Yeah. You know, it's disturbing. So you want a postdoctoral fellowship to work on your memoir, Children of the Roojme. I wrote it the way it sounds to me. Children of the Roojme. I wrote phonetics. I wrote it R-U-E, like Rue, Roojme.
There you go.
You want a postdoctoral fellowship to work on your memoir, Children of the Roojme, under the guidance of Toni Morrison. What was it like working with Toni?
Toni Morrison is an incredible teacher and an incredible writer. She's an incredible human being. But one of the things that I think that most people don't get is how much she's playful. She wants to be, you know, as hard as her work is, she is also light of heart. And she taught me not only to write a better book than I was writing, but to make my own importance, to tell people how much I'm worth, to not always accept everything because it's offered to me, to do for others. You know, she was the first one who had the Schweitzer Chair in the Humanities that used the money for other people, to bring up other people, to help others rise. And so it was a magnificent 2 years. I sat in an office adjacent to her. She saw every page. She critiqued everything that I did, from what I wore to, you know, to what I wrote. And I really can't believe I had that magical time. It almost feels a million miles away right now. So
how were you introduced to her?
Through this grant. I mean, I won the fellowship, and she called me personally to tell me.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't believe it. And I called her office back, and her secretary started to laugh at me. She said, "I knew you weren't going to believe it." So
she called you personally.
Yeah. So the first time I met her, I flew to Albany for kind of my induction ceremony, and that's how I met her.
I'm happy that I did ask you that. How did you meet her? Even though you won the fellowship, because
right.
Then you talked about how you actually did meet. So that
physically meet her, yeah.
And what do you remember most about Toni?
To limit it to that, I think how validating she was, not just to me, but to the people around her. And when she says things like, "I don't write for white people, I don't care about them," it created my philosophy for me, you know. So I think that level of fixing myself in the world came from just casual conversation with her over Chinese food or whatever.
Back to, you've written and performed several one-woman plays, Ramadan Moon, which explores the mythology associated with women who are veiled and the different reasons and responses to the veil. Even though they still face violence, more women no longer wear their veils, correct? In some Arab countries?
It depends on where they are. They just want a choice, you know.
Do you know where they have the most freedom at?
Well, Lebanon is very free, and places, there's the part of the Arab world is like, there are like three parts. There's the Levantine, and that's Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Then there's North Africa, which is Morocco, Libya, the countries over there, Algeria. And then there's the Gulf, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran. Okay, so if you think of it that way, the Levantine part, which has the most Western influence, is where people are the most free to express themselves. So Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, you'll find more mixture. In all the cosmopolitan cities, except in Saudi Arabia and probably Iran, you have women doing various, wardrobe, religion choices. But when you get into the smaller towns, you're more likely to see veiled women and also see more FGM happening, more village life happening. So there's more
what?
FGM is, the female genital mutilation.
I thought that's what it was, but I didn't. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it depends on whether you're in a metropolitan area or in which city, and then where you are in which country, and then where you are in that country. So
how do you feel about the cultural shift? Because it definitely has shifted within the past, would you say, decade?
Well, it's interesting because I'm in France, who has the most anti-Muslim laws in the world, in the Western world. For instance, there are places where women are not allowed to go into the sea covered. They have to wear bikinis. They can't wear burkinis. Burkinis cover them and then cover them, right? So then they go swimming. That makes them feel that they're still treasuring their devotion to Allah, as well as getting to go into the ocean. And that became outlawed in France, in many places in France where they couldn't wear their swimwear of choice. And so it's really interesting because with 9/11, the veil became politicized more than it had ever been. Right. And because it got politicized, just like any other movement, people who would not necessarily say, I want to wear it, wanted to fight for it. So then they began to wear it, because it had meaning to them. So I think it's still very, very politicized, but I think it's also losing its symbolic representation, except to some, I guess, more closed-minded people.
And I was watching something, I think it was on Netflix. It was something on Netflix about women and wearing the veils. I'm going to read a quote. Almost a life follows, is it Day Day or Dee Dee?
Day Day, you got it right.
Day Day. Almost a life follows Day Day. The middle daughter, that's a very urban name, Day Day. Almost a life follows Day Day, the middle daughter of three sisters who lived with their mother during the civil war that tears Lebanon apart. Day Day is waiting for her fiance to send for her so they can be married and live in the US. During their time apart, she endures much of the war, living in bomb shelters, relocating time and again. When Day Day finally comes to the US to marry Victor, her life settles into a peaceful routine. That is when she realizes she misses the war. I've never read a quote about a character missing a war.
That is based on my cousin's words out of my cousin's mouth. My cousin Henri was engaged to a woman named Nahla. This is their story. This is the basis of their story. When she came to the US, I helped her get married. I was in New York at the time. And afterwards, I saw her a few weeks later and I said, "How are you?" And she said, "I miss the war." And that was the seed for the book. And so one of the things I had to try to imagine, because it's fiction, what are the elements that a woman in a female family without men to protect them, what are the elements that this trauma would create that would make you miss it when your life is now completely peaceful? And she immediately got a great job. They live in a great house. I mean, life really settled down. So my question to myself as a writer was, can you imagine a life where you miss the war? And so that's what I worked on when I created the book. This is the book I'm finishing now here in France.
And what is it called?
Almost a Life.
Oh, it's almost a life. Okay, it's almost a life. I don't know why, for some reason, I thought almost, I guess I assumed that it was already published.
No, it's my work in progress.
This is your work.
I wish it was. It will be. I got to finish it.
What aspects did Day miss about the war?
So what I create, and I don't want to give too much of the book away, is how they created community to collectively deal with the trauma they were dealing with. And the fact that they were a fatherless home, their father dies at the beginning of the war, meant they had to become more resilient and more, have a lot of dexterity and brilliance about how they were going to get through one phase and another. They also had to face the patriarchy who was trying to shift them. For instance, when you become a widow in these cultures, the next male relative will try to take over your life. Like, okay, your husband's gone, so I'm going to tell you what to do, right? And they had to resist that. And so that sense of being together in disaster, it's like having been on a lifeboat together, gives you a relationship that you don't have from an ordinary life. And that's what I'm trying to create.
You had mentioned before that your success as a writer is largely due to the vision of African-American publishers and writers. Besides the enormous support of Morrison, both presses that publish your poetry, Sufi Warrior, Willow Books, are African-American owned publishers. Do you believe that you would have been as successful as you are if you had not met African-American publishers and writers that supported you along your way?
It's hard to say. I want to say that my talent would eventually have hit somebody, that somebody would have wanted the story. But I don't think I would have had the advocacy or the sincere support and investment that I had from my mentor and my publishers. And so it's really hard to say. I would like to think that somewhere in the world, there's room for the stuff that I write that everybody's interested in. But it's almost more satisfying to have gone this route, because I feel like I came up through the family instead of having strangers, the other gays come in and say, "Oh yes, you're good, we'll pick you. We'll pick you. Well, you can be the one." Because one of the things that was interesting when we were selling Children of the Roojme, it had Toni Morrison attached to it. So we thought, my agent and I thought, selling Children of the Roojme to a publisher was going to be easy, right? But publishers kept coming back to us and saying, "We already published an Arab book this year." And it could have been a cookbook, or it could have been essays, it could have been anything. But as long as they did one Arab book, they felt like they had done their due. So in a way, I feel like I came up through the family. I got picked by the family and promoted by the family and ended up where I belong.
So you've been a fellow at residencies in Marfa, Lannan, Macedonia, Brazil, Spain, and Egypt. You've also taught for Hedgebrook in India. What was your most memorable experience at a residency or teaching outside of the US?
One of the most incredible moments teaching in India is we were under we're in the jungle. They put our table up, our seminar table up in the jungle, this long table. And they put a yellow tablecloth on it. And I don't think they were thinking what they were doing. And because of the yellow tablecloth, monkeys gathered overhead in the jungle. So I was teaching under monkeys while I was teaching writing. So that's pretty memorable to have these monkeys like saying, "Is that yellow about bananas, or is it about," so they were watching our writing class. So that was amazing.
You know, I was in Jamaica one time, and I was at the Bob Marley estate. And I think we were leaving, either we were exiting or leaving. And I looked up, and all of these kids were like up in the trees, like I've never seen kids or I've never seen kids up in trees like that before. And I was just like, wow, it was. So you mentioning the monkeys made me think of the kids up in there, because
up in the trees.
Yeah, it's just not, you just don't see that. So, so Voices of Our Nation Arts Foundation, VONA, is a written arts organization that was founded in 1999 by Pulitzer Prize winning author Junotdiaz, along with you, Victor Diaz, and DM Jones, in order to provide emerging writers of color with workshops and mentoring by established writers of color. Since its founding, over 2,500 aspiring writers from around the world have been involved in their programs. The mission is to develop emerging writers of color through programs and workshops taught by established writers of color. How did you and Juno, Victor, and DM, how did you all meet? What was the process of coming together?
DM and I were already colleagues. He was the head of creative writing at St. Mary's College, and I was at Mills College, which are close to each other. He was on the board of the Hurston Wright Foundation. Hurston Wright was already doing workshops for writers of color in the DC area. And he was on the board, and they had a discussion about having similar workshops on the West Coast, so people on the West Coast could go. So we decided to be part of Hurston Wright West, and this is 1997. We had 2 years where we had workshops at St. Mary's College, and we hired Juno to be one of the teachers, and Victor was in his class. In 1999, the Hurston Wright Foundation decided to dedicate all of their workshops to writers from the African diaspora. So for us, that meant a lot of our population wouldn't have been able to go to the workshop. And we felt that being on the West Coast, where there was such a huge Latinx and Asian population, that limiting the workshops, while it's a great thing to do, to African Americans would also leave a lot of people without workshops that needed them. So we were talking about it in Victor's kitchen very early one morning, like 2 a.m. And we were saying, oh, it's so sad that we're not going to be able to do this anymore. And I finally said, well, why don't we just start one on our own? Try it. Why don't we have it on our own? We already saw that people needed it and that it was successful. At the time, Victor was in the master's program at the University of San Francisco for social justice and teaching. And he went to his department and he pitched the idea, and they gave us our first seed grant to start VONA at the University of San Francisco, where we were for 15 years. And so we started very small with just poetry and residency and memoir and novel. And then we started seeing so much desire for it that we grew and grew and grew until we had 2-week workshops with approximately 140 participants a year. And we moved from the University of San Francisco when they changed their policies to Berkeley. And then we moved from Berkeley to other places. And I left in 2019, and they're still going strong. So, yeah.
Do you remember who some of the earlier instructors were in?
Yeah, we had Terry McMillan, Walter Mosley, Dancy Senna, Chris Abani, Matt Johnson, Colson Whitehead, Lisa Chavez, Willie Perdomo, Suhair Hamad, Ruth Foreman, Patricia Smith, Dana Smith, Marita Goldman, Jessica, can't remember her last name, I'll come back to her, Lorena De Cervantes. We had a lot of great instructors, very dedicated, not getting paid very much, but really on board for our mission, you know?
I don't remember how VONA came across my radar at all. And I don't remember. But Yes, it was 2014 because I applied, and when I found out that Andrew Pham was instructor for nonfiction, because I write nonfiction, you know, found out who he was and became familiar with his literature, and I know that he had a trans sibling who had committed suicide. I knew that his workshop would be perfect for me, and I would feel comfortable because my literature at that time, I was writing about mental health and an unrequited love who committed suicide. I knew that I wanted to. I knew that I wanted to study with him, and we were in Miami that summer. It would have been the shooting in Charleston had already happened, and I took Amtrak. And so my Amtrak left from New York, and we went through, you know, traveling down through the South. We didn't go through that area, but we went through that, I guess I want to say like the general, we passed through the general area, but not directly through the area. So, and you know, that was obviously heavily in the news and the media. And I think even at VONA, that was pretty much, were you there?
Yes, I was always there, yes.
So I just remember it being very, you know, talked about, and just a feeling, just the, you know, the aftermath of all of that was definitely felt at VONA and discussed.
Yeah, we were there too when Pulse happened, and that was very painful for our, you know, the Pulse shootings.
The year after.
Yeah, it was very painful for our community. We set up altars, and then we had, you know, prayer circles, and yeah, it was pretty difficult.
I've lived with hate, but not in terror. We have had years of hostility directed towards us as Arab Americans, not centuries. African Americans consider their daily lives differently from me, with the readiness to face kindness or anger. And this is, you actually mentioned some of this earlier, but I'm going to read it anyway because it fits in right now. Acceptance or prejudice, love or violence, as one alone in an environment and feeling targeted, or being one of many and feeling like a threat, even in church. I know that there was so much outrage because it did happen in a church, a place of worship, a place where people definitely go and have no second guesses of them, of their safety.
Right. You always think that there are certain things that are going to be sanctuaries, and that everybody will recognize them as sanctuaries. And you feel that way about churches, mosques, temples, hospitals, and all bets are off these days. As a matter of fact, people seem to target schools, seem to target those buildings more than other buildings because they know that they can get more bodies that way. That's what's so terrifying about it, you know. So what do? You stay home or and decide not to worship where you want to worship? What I mean, it's pretty terrifying.
When I was younger, because I was always a news junkie, and I still am to a degree, I always remember hearing the stories of the suicide bombers in, you know, in Arab countries in the Middle East. Me and my mother visited New York for the first time in 1994, which would have been a year after the World Trade Center. There was a bombing down there that it was in the garage. I think it was in the garage. And I know because we visited the World Trade Center that year. I was always aware of the violence and the destruction. And I always just said to myself, like, wow, you know, that doesn't happen in America. And I guess I was so surprised, like not surprised, but it was like, well, you know, and this is as a kid, it's like, well, that happens there. Why doesn't that happen here? What was the, you know, what was causing, why were they acting out like that there versus it not happening here? And so here we are, what this would be 30 something years later. And now to see this level of violence and you know, it's not suicide bombers. Thankfully, it's not suicide bombers, but now it is still violence and rage and destruction. It is now happening. So it's like, you know, what happens, you know?
There's a real wave of terrorism that they feel legitimized. They don't feel like they really feel like they're leaders rather than reactors. And I think that's what's very curious about it, because they have support from the top, they have Donald Trump's support and people like him, that they actually feel like they aren't disrupting as much as they're doing good. They really are living this illusion. The recent movements we've seen targeting LGBTQ marches and pride marches where all these Proud Boys were arrested outside of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and other and they stopped another one, I think it was in Michigan, where they're coming with live ammunition to a parade. You know, no matter what that parade's for, they're coming with a live ammunition to a parade because they think they have a higher goal. And that's what terrorism is. It's this kind of armed response to the fanatic beliefs that you have. But the people here really do think that they're doing something that's morally correct. And that's what's so confusing to me about them, because it feels like they can't look at themselves and say, we all have souls, or we all have this, or we all have that, and therefore we have a right to live in the world. They'll be nicer to their puppy than they will be to another human being. Yeah. And I'm all about puppies, but yeah, I just don't get it. And I'm terrified by the level of weaponry available in this country, and by the nonchalance with which our government is treating that. I think it's so ironic that people can't drink until they're 21, but they can go buy an AR-15 rifle. I mean, it doesn't even make sense.
I mean,
it doesn't make sense.
On so many levels, it appears that even though it is obviously illegal and harmful and dangerous and destructive, it appears that the message is that it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
they never get charged with anything. All those guys who were stopped with all those arms outside of Coeur d'Alene are being charged with misdemeanors, even though those weapons were intent to kill.
And now they're targeting some drag story or drag queen story hour.
Yeah, that's one of my friend's projects in the San Lorenzo library. And he hasn't even answered my emails because I'm sure he's super devastated by that, because it's happening in the Bay Area, which we don't ever expect to happen. Right
now, you live there. You're there now, right? You live there now.
I live there now, but I'm in France.
Right, you're in France.
But I live in the Bay Area. Yeah.
I have some stories about the Bay Area, and it's actually in regards to the person that I had written about, and I'll mention that to you later.
Okay.
Actually, it was based on a young guy who, his family was from Oakland, and your Black Muslim bakery. And,
oh yeah.
Yeah. Andrew had accepted for me to workshop, and it was called morphing. Yeah. But he had when did you get to Oakland?
1993.
1993.
Mm-hmm. From New York.
From New York. How do you emotionally distance yourself from traumatic stories?
I go by going into them. I know that sounds crazy, but I immersed myself into a particular aspect of a traumatic story. Again, I try to find my in-route, usually through women, or through women more often than not, or through art. And then in that way, I can take it apart and understand it. Mm-hmm. And then that gives me some ability to like step back and then kind of hold the part that I took out, that I extracted, to connect with other parts of my art.
I don't know why, but for some reason, I am drawn to traumatic stories. And I've experienced a lot of trauma and seen a lot of trauma. I wonder if maybe if I hadn't had all those experiences and it been in my life so heavily, if I wouldn't be drawn to it still, the narratives,
Are you re-traumatized by them, or do you have more of an objective distance from them? Or are you trying to find community with them?
I don't know. I've never been asked that before. I don't know.
One of the reasons I ask that is sometimes my students at Mills will say, I can't read a book about sexual assault. It triggers my experiences. And I'll say to them, I want you to think of the writer as someone who's been brave and who has courage to write about sexual assault and who can be in community with you. And after you think about that, if you think about how this person might start to normalize the trauma you've had, and you still don't want to read it, fine, you don't have to read it. But I really want you to think about being in communion with them first before pushing them to the side the way they've already been pushed to the side. So it's kind of a way to make yourself more balanced by allowing other people with the traumas into your life.
It's interesting because with me being a writer and some of the things that I've written about and that I'm writing about, and I'm also making a documentary film, which is not centered on violence. I guess, a lot of people, don't want to read certain things. They don't want to hear it. They do push people away, or, they're shielding themselves, and they have the right to protect themselves. And at the same time, people who have these experiences, I mean, everyone is sharing their experience for different reasons. I can't speak for anyone else other than myself. I share mine, because it's based on, this is something that I survived, or, this is something that, I experienced. I'm able to discuss how I survived, and how it feels. It's something that we're left with no choice, but I mean, I wouldn't say we're left.
But that's a fact.
Again, I can't speak for everyone, because some people don't and won't talk about it. But then there's some who will not shut up, like me. I can't. And I don't make it my, I don't talk about it every day and every week or whatever, but it's, I've already written about it, so I don't have to do that anymore, but it's still one of those things. It is a recurring theme. And, what do you do when violence is a recurring theme in your life? And when you've grown up with it, as a child, and you've, seen police brutality and heard the stories of your females and your family members being shot to death by, their husbands, as a child, that's not, the average child is not experiencing that or hearing those kind of stories.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, in Altadena.
Oh, Altadena, okay.
Yeah, and in 1991, when all of that stuff, when Rodney King was beaten by the LAPD, and me and my mother, we were living behind his mother at that time. So I woke up that Sunday and just, heard a lot of drama and noises that I had never, heard. And then I would probably say it was up to maybe 6 months to a year, just the whole aftermath of, well, actually, no, it was longer than that, because then the riots were the next year. So just growing up with all of that and just my own family's history and stuff, it's been a lot. And it's still a lot. And that's why I said, I might be a little slower today, because it is a lot, just a lot going on, so.
I hear you. Well, one of the most tragic things that happened yesterday was, I know this isn't part of the interview, the Supreme Court passed a ruling that said politicians on the state level can control what's put in libraries. And one state, and I can't remember which one, has served librarians with papers to arrest them for trafficking porn, because they made pride displays visible in the library. You know how they put out the books, here's some books for the kids and here's some books for the adults. And this is our, they just nod to Pride Week, right? So now they're being accused of trafficking porn because politicians are taking over the libraries. And the Supreme Court said that was okay yesterday.
This is the first.
It is so disgusting. And politicians have never been able to touch the libraries. That was a place where you had a library board, and the library board was defending the First Amendment. And now we're going to have libraries completely politicized according to whatever state decides to adopt this ruling, whatever their particular persuasion is in terms of politics.
No, I didn't hear. If I did, it must have flew by me, because I definitely was looking through the news and stuff yesterday, but I was at the library because I went to print out some of the interview stuff. And the library that I'm in New York, the library that I go to, I've noticed for the past month, I think this is the first time that I noticed, like right there, when you go up to the counter, they've got all these, the LGBT books and trans and, all this stuff. And I'm just like, I don't ever remember, and I go to the libraries often, but I don't know if I'm necessarily in there during the month of June. But I don't ever remember seeing such a heavy display of LGBT books?
Because I think people at librarians are pushing back against, the don't say gay movement and the critical race theory crap, and
what a way to, not a way, but just the whole of just ruining people's fun and just making people miserable and
making them ignorant because they don't get to read a range of literature. They only get to read what's in the square box.
So it's so unnecessary. It is so unnecessary. You had said, when is a mass shooting more than a mass shooting? This was December of 2015. For Arab and Muslim Americans, every report begins an anxious wait for the attacker's identity to be revealed. And with that, now it's the same as in America. Americans wait for the moment to find out who the mass shooter is.
Yeah, it's usually a white guy.
Pardon me?
It's usually a white guy.
Yes, it usually is a white guy. This is why I'm working hard with the board to repair the lost faith some of the community members have in us. That is why I've asked the petitioners and the NYC alum group to meet with me and other board members. That's why I've talked to faculty and consultants, alums, and loved ones to get a greater understanding of how to move forward and provide an experience for writers of color that they deserve. I guess it was over the past 2 or 3 years, or in 2019 when you left, there's been some issues with VONA and
Yeah, it was about community standards and what kind of behavior we condone or police, and it was over an accusation against one of our faculty, not at VONA. The accusation that was made against them was not something that happened at VONA, but they were a member of our faculty, and as a result reflected on VONA, and so people wanted to shut VONA down because we were affiliated. And I don't believe in that. I believe in restoring justice and studying what happened and going forward from that. And so we did a lot of work to be responsible for creating guidelines for the community and for monitoring and providing support for any kinds of things that might have happened during the workshop. We never had any specific allegations at the workshop, so we're relieved about that, but we wanted to be responsible. And so before I left, I did a lot of training in transformative and restorative justice. So did my team, worked on a lot of, ways of examining how we run the workshops, and then bowed out gracefully, so to speak.
You also said, we deserve to have this workshop for writers of color. It's one of our only chances of talking about our work seriously. To have those good conversations about craft and those tough ones about being people of color.
I think that's true, because I'm still hearing reports of discrimination in workshops and people exoticizing people of color in writing workshops, and or making them invisible. And so unless we have the space, we're not going to have the conversations on the level at which we need to have them, so that people can get their work looked at with some seriousness and gravitas. Also, we don't get to form our community. And I think forming our community is one of the biggest supports we have. My best friends come from VONA.
VONA was a community that I was not aware of. I'm happy that I discovered VONA. I'm happy that I discovered this place for writers of color, and that has, nurtured me, and actually made a friend in the workshop. Jacqueline Reason, she's a writer and a playwright, and she was in my cohort with Andrew Pham that 2015. This was something that someone had wrote a blog on for American for the Arts. I think his name is Eric Nugent, Creating Dangerously, My Week at VONA. As we came to understand, writers of color often face challenges that hinder their artistic progress to express themselves freely. We are often told to write certain types of story, to avoid certain topics, to tell universal stories that erase the nuances of identity. And then he went on to further say, VONA, at least for 1 week, takes away these challenges, creating a safe space where writers of color can write freely and openly, to write like our lives depended upon it, to write as if the lives of others do too.
That's a beautiful quote. I love that.
What would the literary landscape look like if VONA was not around, if VONA has not been around for the past, it's almost going on 25 years.
It's, let's see, 1999 for VONA, and then if you add 2 years of the Hurston Wright West before we became VONA. So yeah, it's getting there. You know, it's interesting. It's a good question because it took a long time for kind of the reel to take up. We had these beautiful writers come through our workshop, T.R.E. Jones and Ingrid Rojas Contreras and Christine Now, and all these people who are pretty popular right now, they all came through our workshop. So would they be out there? Would the literary landscape look like it looks? Would there be so many people of color nominated for awards? Would there be so many people of color on the shelves? I don't know, but I think it's because of VONA and workshops like VONA that do this push that works two ways. It makes the community very aware that there are writers of color that do more than the single story, the slave story or the ghetto story or whatever story, you know, the lotus blossom story, whatever story they expect out of your particular culture. And then it also supports the writers, so they will be hungrier and more excited about doing their writing. So I think it works on kind of a field level, but it also works on an inspiration level, because what if these writers didn't have that support and didn't feel like they could finish their books? What if they didn't feel like, maybe they would have done it eventually, but I think that, you know, having some of speed under their wheels because they went to VONA or the workshops like it, I think really has helped a lot of people personally. And it certainly has helped the industry to see who's available and who's writing, you know.
Over the years, I've talked to Andrew Pham several times, and he's read other things that I've written. He's still supportive, very supportive, and accessible. He's accessible. Someone else from the cohort, JT, the LA storyteller, he's a writer and based in Los Angeles. I just interviewed him for a show about a week ago. Yeah, there's some just amazing people with VONA. And you know if VONA is going to be having a 25th anniversary celebration in the...
I don't know. I saw that in your questions and I don't know. I assume that they will. I hope that they will.
Yeah, they should. Yeah. That would be nice. So what were you doing before the start of the pandemic?
I was teaching and teaching my fitness classes and working on my book and traveling. And then I was teaching online and that was it. Taking hikes with my dog. Yeah, it really changed everything. I had actually this residency I'm in now. I was supposed to come in 2020, but they had to cancel it. So yeah.
You're in France.
Yeah.
What residency are you at?
It's called Cours Commune, and it's about an hour south of Paris.
And how long will you be there for?
Just till the end of the month.
You were just in Nice?
Right, for the James Baldwin Conference.
And how was that? How was that?
Very interesting. I met some really lovely people there. Some of the discussions about Baldwin were very interesting. Some of them, you know, not so much, but you know, it's hard to capture everything that he means to everybody in one little conference. But everybody asks me what my favorite panel was, and I keep saying lunch, because the best conversations I had were people I never met over lunch and talking about everything, which was really great.
Was that your first Baldwin conference?
Yeah, and I only got there by accident because I didn't know what was going on in Nice. And a friend of mine says, "Oh, you're going to be in France? I was thinking of going to the Baldwin conference." And I'm going, what? And another VONA faculty member, Faith Adiele, is here as well. And we just immediately got our tickets and our housing and headed down.
Was it what was the attendance like? Was it pretty packed?
I think I don't know what their expectations were, but you know, it's expensive and it's in a place. One day it's in Nice and the other day it's in St. Paul de Vence, which is his village. And that's in the hills and it's all cobblestones and it's hilly, so it's not accessible to people. So I don't know what their expectations were, but I would say there were a little bit over 200 people.
Oh, that's a nice
Yeah.
crowd. When the pandemic started, did you stay at home for like that year?
Yeah, I mean, there was a point where we were washing our mail. Remember when we were taking all of our food out of its packaging? And yeah, I did everything. I did continue to hike, but I couldn't go work, and I certainly couldn't work at the Y. I mean, the Y shut down, mills shut down. We went online.
Mhm.
It was a very abrupt transition to going online, and
Well, with the pandemic, we started to see all of so some people don't call them riots. They call them
other marches, whatever.
marches, protests. We
Mhm.
saw a lot of uprising, a lot of social injustice. I'm going to read a quote. The intersectionality of my literary life and my political ideals hardened my loyalty to civil rights and racial equality. Not only because of my experiences, but also because my core beliefs dictate a loyalty to the words of Dr. King. To that moment of communion with my family at the table and to my father at his best, standing in the garden talking to Mr. Herder when no one else would. What do you think about history repeating itself?
Isn't it tragic that we never learn? As a matter of fact, I think in those days, even though those times were very racist, we're talking about the early 60s, and Mr. Herder, lived down the street with his 9 kids, and one of his kids was a friend of mine. And this is a small town in Pennsylvania. I think the difference is now we have those prejudices resurfacing, but with more guns and with more civilian violence. Before, we were worried about Bull O'Connor, who jailed Martin Luther King, right? We worried about those sheriffs, we worried about George Wallace and some lynch mobs, but there wasn't like daily incredible fear in every corner of our country of all this like massive violence. And then on top of that, you have the situation disparities in the community have become so deep that people are doing things to keep themselves elevated, like sideshows have become very big in Oakland.
What kind of shows?
Sideshows where people get their cars and they're doing these big circles and all that stuff, right?
Yes.
But that's a way of relieving, the pain of the neighborhood, right? And then these cause civil unrest because traffic is stopped, because it's all African Americans doing it, because it's, so there's all these ways that we're bottlenecked and we're imploding, right? We're imploding.
Mm-hmm.
And so having somebody like my dad talk to somebody like Mr. Herder feels like a simple solution that can't happen right now. I don't think that can happen. I don't think these person-to-person moments are available to us because there's so much interference between politics, between people being armed, between cancel culture and everything being on social media. All of that stuff takes away the moment of harmony or the moment of consideration that people can have for each other.
Yeah. Is Mr. Herder still alive?
Okay, I doubt it. My dad's not still alive, so.
Also, Mr. Herder. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Herder's probably not still alive.
What do you think he would say?
Oh, I think he would be so saddened. I think he'd be so sad. I think my dad would be so sad.
Mm-hmm.
It would be. I think I'm kind of glad my dad didn't make it to this point in time, because I think it would depress him because of all these years. I mean, he died at 104. There's a long history of watching change. And when Obama was elected, he saw this elegant man and his beautiful family. He's old now, right? So these are the terms he was talking in the White House. And he said, this is the way things should be. These beautiful people, well-spoken. And like I said, he loved good speeches and, representing our country. He said, this is the way it should be. So he got to see the way it should be. He got to miss Donald Trump because I think that would have depressed him. He doesn't like clowns. My dad didn't like clowns.
There is some comfort for me knowing that, I wasn't born in the civil rights, but there is some comfort for me knowing that life was different. Life, I would consider life, I mean, even though there was, some obviously there were issues and stuff, but to me, I guess comparing life to the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s, to me, I would consider life to have been beautiful compared to, you know, what it is now. This is just so, I'm happy that I'm happy that I do have some good memories and, you know, some experiences, because to see the behavior now, you know, earlier you said the tragic thing that had happened was with the Supreme Court, and for me, you know, kind of what's on my mind, not heavily, but I think it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, a young Black male was shot and killed in a pharmacy just 3 blocks from my house, and, you know, chased in there and just violated. And I walk by there probably 2 or 3 times out of the week, you know. And what's interesting is when people die in urban areas, you know, you'll see all these candles. Even if you see one, you know, it can be either, you know, that's just the one candle that's left behind, but usually there's, you know, 5, 6, 7, or a dozen, or sometimes there's like
Lots.
lots. And it's interesting, you know, he was from Los Angeles. I think I walked by there that day when it happened. I was preparing for an interview. So I remember I had went to the library, and I had walked to this park, went to the library, and I would have walked by that side of the street that day, but I didn't, because I like to take a back street. I don't like to be around a lot of people. Time-wise, I was in my apartment when it happened and everything. It's just, you know.
You were close though.
Pardon me?
You were close. I mean, you could have taken the street. You could have done it at a different time. You just kind of missed it by all these little calculations.
I did, and there's no sign, there's no, you know, that happened. No candles, nothing, you know, just you know. After June 2020, did you find yourself in the community discussing equity more?
You know, what was interesting about that time is, because we weren't seeing each other in person, we were talking about equity more, because we could get together with more people, because people were zooming into things, and they were zooming into things from all over, and people were very eager for those conversations. And and so we were really concerned with that period of time. As a matter of fact, my school, instead of being about diversity and equality, they changed their mission to be anti-racist. And so Mills College is an anti-racist school. And so they adopted Black mental health guidelines, and we declared ourselves an anti-racist campus, which means that we have to work against race rather than for equity. So against racism instead of for equity. But I think in the long run, all those people who were out there for the BLM marches and stuff, as soon as they could go back to their offices, they weren't as interested in it anymore. So I think the discussions have really siphoned down to a few true believers. And the other place we see them is in local political races, like how many more candidates of color we are seeing running for representative or running for state representative or something like that. So I think it has some good effects, but I do think that all those people that were out there have now gone back to their regular lives, many of them.
Yeah, and some are not, some have lost interest in.
Yeah, they weren't going to work. They were home with COVID or whatever. They had time to have a conscience. Now they just have a time to be capitalists. I mean, it's
Back to business as usual.
You know.
Yeah. You wrote an article for Hyper and it was based on, it was to be seen is the imperative for artists, for all artists, for Southwest Asian and North African artists, that visibility must include their complexity. This, however, is rarely the case, especially when it comes to established art institutions. The subject of an engaging new conversation series hosted by the Zamin Project and produced by the Aggregate Space Gallery. You were involved in that conversation?
No, I was reporting on the panel, and it was really interesting because what the VONA artists did was, because they couldn't find space for themselves in standard galleries, they started their own projects. And once they started their own projects, and this is so typical, the larger establishments also wanted them. So it's almost like they created their visibility and then people came for them, you know, in that kind of way. Kind of like being a YouTube artist and suddenly a record company comes and signs you up right after you spend years being on YouTube. So It was really, and their work was so varied. I loved it because I don't know a lot about visual art, but what I loved about it was it's not the expected kind of art. It's everything you can imagine that their interests cover, their styles cover. So I was really captivated by what they had to say to each other and how they conversed. And I was just a reporter in the room for that. It was nice to be a listener.
So over the past 3 decades, I've known several Black men who've committed suicide. Have you personally lost someone to suicide?
I have not. No, I think that there's more alternatives culturally, that the people with depression or mental illness in my circles have had opportunities to get a lot of support. And the support, it's not the same kind of support that you get in the West. It might be having everybody pray for you. It might be having somebody just walk with you every day. So I've had more experiences with losing people to poor medical practices than I've had to suicide. Like in my husband's family, he's African-American. We had 2 COVID deaths, one because the hospital turned away his niece because she was African-American and uninsured, and she went home and died on her floor that very day. And his brother was not given his health care because they put other people in front of him, and he's in the hallway on a gurney for a week, and his kidneys failed, and they didn't do anything about it. And so he died from COVID. And so those have been more of my experiences where the system has failed rather than the individual.
What would you say? Can you share any words of encouragement for those who are suffering in silence? What would you say?
I would try to create, first of all, don't let silence be the place you exist. Lift yourself up to speak, even if you can't speak out of your house, to speak into a journal or draw pictures, express yourself in some way. Find like-minded people that connect, and take walks. Take lots of
Walks do help. I've been walking for 20-something years, so
doesn't it make a difference? It just kind of like
and after this I'll be going for a walk. So and you mentioned earlier that you're a fitness instructor. How long have you been a fitness instructor for?
Since 1984.
Oh, okay. Wow. I just thought that was something kind of probably new because of the pandemic. I saw some of your videos.
Oh, no, bad. I'm better in person. I'm much better in person. But my students are very dedicated, and so they begged me to go online, and so I did.
Oh, so you would have been online if it wasn't for
the outcry.
How do you transform what you tell writers to apply to fitness?
Well, you have to realize that there's energy in both of them, and to feel what your body is telling you in both circumstances. Like if you write from your head, you're going to write from the place where you store outside knowledge. If you write from your body, you're going to write from the place where you store your inside knowledge. The same with fitness. You can do all the push-ups in the world, but if you're not feeling everything that's happening to you or responding to your pectoralis muscles or to your back or to your arms or anything, you're not going to have kind of a satisfying movement. And so these are moments of individual, personal, and organic energy, and you have to tap into them to make both of them successful.
What keeps you hopeful and motivated?
The people around me. I have a lot of loving support around me. My colleague, for instance, Faith, who's here with me, and my family and my dog. And the fact that I will run into people who want to engage. Like at this conference, I met so many people who are doing good work. And the other thing that keeps me hopeful, and this is totally off topic, but I am addicted to music, and music really creates shifts, changes my mood and my perception of the world.
And I noticed that you had, was it John Legend or someone's music that you listened to? No, how do you say his name? John Baptiste?
Well, John Baptiste isn't my first one. I listened to Omar Sosa and Ibrahim Malouf to do my writing with. And John Baptiste I listen to for fun because he's fun. Yeah.
And is that with your workouts?
No, my workouts they're all, when I do my workouts in person, I have music. I can't do it online. I do mixes of pop music from all the years. Yeah, because they have to be a particular beat. And so I use things that are very aligned with the beats that I'm doing in my classes.
You mentioned a name, but I can't pronounce it. Oh, rewind a little bit. You said Omar or Amir?
Omar Sosa and Ibrahim Malouf.
Ibrahim Malouf. What kind of music is that?
Jazz.
American jazz?
Well, he's French. He's French from Lebanon, but he's French. And his music is a mixture, and it's beautiful. It's really goes into your body kind of. And I just saw him live 2 weeks ago for the first time in my life.
Oh,
so
okay.
It was really wild. And then I got to listen to Beyonce's new release, which came out like yesterday, the day before. And we're going to see Mary J. Blige in October. We got like second row seats. I've seen her before. She works hard on stage, man.
I've never seen her. I saw Janet maybe twice, 2 or 3 years ago. You're in France. You weren't worried about, because initially, Europe was on lockdown, and you weren't.
They're more vaccinated than we are.
Are people still walking around masks?
They're on the public transit, but not out in the streets. But they're 80% vaccinated. The US doesn't have that kind of vaccination rate.
Is it what is it? I mean, it's back open to tourists.
Yes. And now we don't have to get a test to go back into the United States. They just stopped that. Yeah.
How does it I guess, New York is still kind of empty. What is it like?
So busy here. Oh, it's so busy. Paris is nuts. It is nuts. It's wall-to-wall people right now.
Really?
Yeah, it's really busy. And the metro system is really crowded. I'm always masked on the metro system.
Oh, wow. It sounds like you are having fun.
I am.
Yeah.
But I'm also writing. I am going to get the book done. And then I'm going to go to the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland for 4 days, and then I'll come home.
Well, look at you on a little world tour pretty much. So when can we expect for it to be published?
In about a year and a half.
A year and a half?
Usually takes a year for them to roll it out. I think I'll get it sold by September, and then I'll take a year.
Are you reading anything right now, or just focusing on your literature?
Oh no, I'm reading 2 things. I'm reading a book called Between Beirut and the Moon, which is a series of short stories by a British writer. And I'm reading The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich, who's a Native American, very well-known Native American author.
Oh.
I think that's all I'm reading right now.
I'm not familiar with Native American writers.
Isn't it crazy that they're so underrepresented?
She's a poet. She was the poet laureate, Joy Hart. I want to say her name,
Joy Harjo. She still is, yeah.
She's still, yeah.
Of the United States, yeah.
Other than her, I'm just not used to hearing their names in any conversations.
It's so underrepresented. But Louise Erdrich won the National Book Award for this book, The Night Watchman. Yeah.
That was recently, wasn't it?
Last year.
Last year. I did hear that book's title. Do you have any book recommendations?
Yes, I have so many. Let me think of what I really enjoyed this year. Because, I teach classes that I have to teach literature. And let me think. I'm trying to think of what I enjoyed the most. There's this one book called Interstate by Jose Vadi, it's nonfiction. You might like it, Rashawn, because what he basically does, his grandfather was a migrant worker, and he goes down Interstate 5 and looks at the lives of the people going all the way to Pomona, where he was raised, and does a really beautiful critique of California's interior. I think you'd really enjoy that book a lot.
It's called Interstate.
Yeah, it's really very good. And I also enjoyed, the name is escaping me right now. Zain Joukadar, ZEYN JOUKAHDAR, VONA writer. his third book is magical, and I can't remember the name of it. The character is trans, and it's about an artist in New York, but I would recommend all of Zane's work. I think that's all that's coming up right now in my head.
I'm gonna
Okay.
end this with a quote of yours, okay? Tell everyone I am affirmative action. Affirmative action is not about the numbers or the race card or the blame game. The most important word there is action. We take an action to give you opportunity to a world outside of your own. Thank you for sharing your world with us and with me. Thank you. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for having me. It was very, very fun and exciting.
You're welcome. Enjoy your stay in France.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.